Hey everybody, welcome back to Not So Sirius. My name is Tommy, and as always, I'm joined by Sam, Joe, and Michael. In today's episode, we decided we wanted to talk about the search for intelligent life in the universe and the different possibilities that we have to discover the intelligent life that could be out there. Like always, if you have any topics that you'd like us to see talk about in a future episode, make sure to leave that in the YouTube comments down below. Otherwise, we hope you enjoy.
So last week we discussed life and the possibilities of life on our solar system. We talked about how life arose on planet Earth. But this week we're going to focus more on intelligent life arising and the chances of intelligent life elsewhere in our galaxy, in our universe, and what defines intelligence.
And how we look for it.
Yes.
And our chances of finding complex life, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the key things that we have to think about if we're pondering both searching and contacting alien life, intelligent life, is sort of what are the underlying assumptions that we're making when we're looking, because humans obviously have a human tinted view of the universe, and it would be good if we could do away with it, but there's obviously some immutable truths about our universe. And so it is likely that if there are aliens out there and if intelligent life does exist, they would follow there would be a set of commonalities between us and them.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's very difficult to look for life without some relation to life as we know it on Earth.
We have to define it based off human standards, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
At least down to like a molecular, like chemical level, like in terms of like how life is composed. I think we have to look at it from the view of what we know life to be.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also a very easy possibility to imagine an alien life that's based off of, some type of artificial intelligence because they're more advanced than us.
Perhaps, but I think if we're gonna go off like let's say intelligence level as well, then we also have to, I think, fall back on the human level of intelligence as a ground level at the very least, because I think we run into the dangers of assuming, if we don't have that baseline as like a grounding level of, this is what intelligence is, this is what at least life may look like to a certain degree as our basis of, what we searched for. And we just go out there and be like, life can be anything. When we look for life outside, it can be close to everything. I think we run into just so much confusion and uncertainty, because this is like a field where, we may never get to in our entire lifetime. It's a very big possibility that we're never able to travel and actually find and come into contact with other life. So I think keeping our searching limits small enough where we have a specific focus on what we're looking for in terms of life will help us get further than keeping everything super general.
I mean, if we are looking for life, an obvious constraint that we can make is finding planets that live both within the Goldilocks zone and that have a habitable environment, at least for the standards of Earth, because that's how we know that is at least a way or a condition that is suitable for some kind of life to arise, to thrive in. So in that sense, though, we're not constraining the search very well, because there are billions and billions of habitable planets probably within our own galaxy, and that really doesn't help us doesn't put us on the right tracks for searching. Then we would probably have to be looking at things like the communications over the electromagnetic spectrum, because that is presumably one of the ways that aliens would envisage contacting us.
Yeah.
And
at least for humans, that's the only way we have thought of so far to communicate.
Yeah,
at the speed of light, so it's quicker than sending something out to the nearest star system.
And there is obviously an idea, which is probably a good one, that if this is what humans found, then this is probably what's going to be encountered by other species. in the sense that it's probably a human mind is not so affected by its own mindness. Instead, it's affected by what's around it. And so it's likely that another kind of species or another kind of life arising elsewhere would run into the same questions and problems that a human would, and so might follow the same development path. For example, humans have mostly scaled up on the energetic side. And on the scale side, we've looked for both up and down, and we've looked for phenomena that arise naturally through our daily experiences, and then we've expanded from that. Using the electromagnetic spectrum to communicate is probably an obvious way that aliens would be using to contact people.
Right.
There would be some sort of universal language that any form of life, any form of complex life in the universe would have to communicate by in order for communication to be even sustainable to a certain level.
Right.
Whether that be electromagnetic or infrared or different radio waves, like there has to be some sort of baseline common language that everyone can communicate to the most basic level.
In a sense,
Right.
Energy is always associated, or some type of unnatural source of energy is, hopefully if we discover it, would be associated with some type of intelligent species. And so astronomers are always, well, not astronomers necessarily, but when astronomers discover new things, for example, when the pulsar was first discovered, I believe it was, immediately people thought aliens because of that constant source of electromagnetic radiation.
I think like anything that's new that seems to break the mold of what is common, people I think will have aliens in the back of their mind as a possibility every single time they see different.
Right.
But there's an actual scientific approach though, but not just speculative conspiracies trying to make sense of what astronomers discover. So for example, SETI took the approach you mentioned, Sam and Joe, about trying to search for alien life using the electromagnetic spectrum.
I mean, and then in our search, then given that the search has been so far inconclusive, this begs the question: why is it that we haven't found anything yet? Especially considering that things like the Drake equation and the sort of probabilistic interpretation of how likely it is for life to arise elsewhere, those kinds of analyses tells us that life is actually pretty common and that we should be finding it quickly and easily, but we haven't found it at all, not even close. I don't think there's any good evidence for it.
The one thing about the Drake equation is you can slightly tweak some constant or some probability within the equation and you get a completely different answer. So for example, we were talking earlier about how there's a paper that came out in the past month or so that it concluded that there's a possibility of 36 intelligent species in our galaxy. And they took an approach very similar to the Drake equation.
But I mean, setting the Drake equation aside, it is conceivable, and many people have put it forward, and the probabilistic approach to this tells us that there should be stuff out there and that we should be finding it. And for some reason, we haven't come close. And this is what's referred to by the Fermi Paradox, in that we have to there must be, or there could be a reason at least that explains why species from separate, completely alien species don't come into contact with each other.
So the Fermi Paradox, if I don't exactly remember, but it's to go along the lines of, if there are billions of galaxies out there, each with billions of stars and billions of planets, then where are the little green men? Something like that.
No,
where are the aliens?
I don't believe so. My understanding of it is that given that the paradox lies in the fact that it seems that the probability of life happening within our universe and within detectable range is somewhat high.
Likely, but yet we don't see anything.
And yet we don't see anything, so therein lies a contradiction, and therefore we have a paradox on our hands.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the solutions to the Fermi paradox is this idea of the great filter, which is this idea that the universe and life within it is such that we can't create abiogenesis somewhere in a timely way and then interact with it elsewhere. So it's this idea that there would be some greater force blocking us from entering in contact with each other.
Right. Yeah, the great filter is like one of the coolest things, and it's essentially like no matter what life looks like, based on intelligence, there has to be certain stepping stones, and like the progress of like civilizations evolving. So for us, it was like the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age, and then electricity came about, and now we have computers and stuff. But just given that, like, if there's a certain amount of stepping stones, and then there's this barrier that prevents other life from contacting us, it then warrants the question of whether we're before the Great Filter and we haven't quite developed the technology that would allow us to communicate, or if we're, the only or one of the very few civilizations that broke through the Great Filter, and that we're on the other side, that we just happen to slip through, and that's why nothing else is contacting us.
Yeah. I mean, to briefly summarize that, it's just a barrier to evolution. It's a question of, are we destined to destruction, or are we prevented from evolving into something? And I mean, I think there is no way for us to resolve that. But that is an interesting theory. And I mean, it can be explained in many ways. For example, one could plausibly imagine that as civilizations get more and more developed, it means that they have access to a lot more capable, they become very capable, and therefore they become capable of self-destructing. Right. And the more they progress along that line, the more the power to self-destruct is given to each and every single person or element or constituent.
Right, it's more accessible and more dangerous.
Right, and so therefore that self-destruction is just the fate reserved to most civilizations that reach a stage advanced enough to allow communication to other people.
Yeah, and it seems like we got very close to that during the Cold War. So the Cold War kind of split off in two directions. We had the space race, the exploration of space, then we had the arms race. And was it a question of, are we going to not click the nuclear missile button and go to space, or are we going to be self-destructive? And maybe, other civilizations in the universe took similar paths, yet they were the ones who blew themselves up.
Yeah. Or, I mean, there is obviously this other idea that natural disasters in any environment are frequent enough that they would prevent they would prevent a species from getting sufficiently evolved to be able to communicate and or receive messages from others.
Right.
I mean, very conceivably, for example, the dinosaurs, which were once the most powerful things on Earth, are just completely gone, and now humans are now the most powerful thing on Earth, even though we're so weak. We're extremely weak. I mean, physically speaking, compared to dinosaurs.
Right.
So. And I mean,
like
we have seen several events of mass destruction on Earth before of natural causes. There's no reason why there wouldn't be another one potentially coming along.
You did not look at our tectonic plates.
Yeah,
one of those snap, and then everything could just
Like if Yosemite explodes, then we're all gone. Like, who's to say that life doesn't get evolved enough to have like their versions of dinosaurs? But before they're able to actually reach the point where they have technology, like whether it's global warming on their planet, asteroids, stars exploding, other civilizations even, like something is stopping basic life and semi-advanced life from at least getting to where we are, as far as we know. And even we're not exactly at the capabilities either.
Yeah. I think that raises a really very human philosophical question, in that there are two implications, but that are both interesting. The former is that one idea that could come out from that is that as a civilization gets more and more powerful, it means that more and more people will want to wield that power against each other, and so as a civilization becomes more advanced, the number of skirmishes within its own ranks will increase.
Yeah.
and then they'll head down the primrose path to self-destruction and all of this. But there's this other concept that could come out of that, in that for civilization to get truly developed and advanced, they would have to find peaceful ways to all get together and to bring together the best of their species, which could mean that, in fact, all species capable of such impressive technological feats as communicating or interacting with aliens would in fact be extremely peaceful, extremely patient, extremely logical creatures.
Right. Yeah, and it just comes down to where we think we are, whether we're before or after the Great Filter, depending on, the socio-political structures that need to be able to go through, whether or not the environments are suitable. There's just a ton of variables that we don't necessarily know that could explain why, as of right now, we're the most intelligent things in the universe that we know of.
Well, we don't know of anything.
Exactly, but is there something that's going to stop us from ever reaching there? Are we the very few that are able to actually get there? And
or you could imagine some kind of spectrum of intelligence where creatures, life with traits of self-destruction or self-destruction aren't considered like intelligent life. Like maybe there's greater beings out there that look frown upon us, or even beings that know that we exist but ignore us on purpose because I think they're gonna die. They're gonna blow themselves up anyways.
I think we do have to fall back onto the scale of what we know of when we get to that question, though, because I think we open ourselves up to too many generalizations and too many what if scenarios when we don't.
Right.
We already have examples of what life can look like. Like you can even study ants. You see how ants work together to build up their nests and their colonies. Like you would consider that to be harmonizing and peaceful in the way, but they're just not as intelligent as we are.
Yeah,
up to the point where humans are. There are different variations of life that we could look at.
Well, I think one interesting idea is that when we look at the time frame in which humans have existed, we've existed for millions of years, but we've only really been able to get and listen and receive messages for the last 70, 80 years now. But even more importantly, we went through a phase of using primarily radio waves and sending signals to now alternative means of communicating here on Earth. So then this is, nowadays, for example, we leak radio signals much less. We don't really make that many mistakes with sending radio signals in to other places. So the chance of an alien species
listening in within some 80-year period.
Yeah, of humans would have to be based within an 80-year period. And presumably very soon we'll only be using optical fibers and things like this. And as we refine our means of communication, we might leave the electromagnetic spectrum, or we might stop sending it through the air, and therefore we will no longer be broadcasting our presence.
It goes the other way too, whether or not we're looking in the right spots and the right time frames for celestial bodies elsewhere in our own galaxy.
I do think there's something to say in regards to that. I think with the search for life, it's not the biggest priority for different astronomers out there in the realm of science right now. It's not where we're pouring all the resources into. It's not where we're trying to develop the fastest or the quickest, or trying to refine methods to actually find life that is out there. And so I think when you get into the questions of the Fermi Paradox and as well as the Great Filter, those things are so prominent because we haven't taken the time necessarily. And I don't think this is a means or called to say that we have to take time, put the resources into, but we just don't know because we haven't even tried super in depth. It's a very broad stroke, surface level. I feel it's very surface level in terms of where we've gone.
Science is very hand wavy.
Yeah, it's still a big unknown compared to where
very loose. Yeah,
science we're trying to get to. It's just different. So there's a reason why these paradoxes and these theories are there.
Yeah, at least I think a big part of the scientific method, which has produced some of the most stunning developments in human history, which has allowed us to develop the science and the mathematics that we have now, is this idea that science should force you to confront your own biases, and it rejects your preconceived ideas, and it forces you to look for objective truths. even, and to accept when you can't find one, and to accept your own limitations, and so on and so forth. At the moment, no one has really been looking for aliens or been broadcasting our presence to aliens following the scientific method that has been established that we should be using. No one has been comparing. Well, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, no one has been looking for signals in a comprehensive way. No one has been trying to test different approaches to it. No one has
As though we're looking for ourselves out there. It's very biased.
Yeah, we are
Right.
looking for ourselves, and the point of science is not to look at yourself. That's a very good way to put it. Science is not about confirming that you are you. It is
Right.
I do think there is a realm of like just uncertainty in terms of we don't know how to look for things.
Right.
We fall back on what we do, what we think would be good, such as, using the Drake equation, looking at different parameters for in our galaxy or just in our solar system, what is out there, what do you define to be a habitable zone, where are different stars that are like the sun, the characteristics of it, I guess, ourselves, because we don't know, like the only basis of life we have is ourselves.
Right.
So it's really hard to apply the scientific method to that when we don't have anything that defines life to be outside of ourselves, because the only life we know to exist is on Earth.
Yeah.
It's really hard to look at it
it's
from a
like-
different
it's like-
angle, because you can't, you fall into the possibility of going into science fiction with all this, where you go,
Mhm.
oh, it just might be like this crazy hypothetical where
Okay.
the real, the realistic and the scientific in that sense is what we have, which is ourselves.
But I think that's
Right.
what you said about we're
Yeah.
falling into science fiction. I think that's the approach we want to take. We want to be at the border edge between what science is, what we know, and what we don't know, being science fiction. And I think that's what
Yeah.
the search for life is. We have to ask questions where we're not biased, and we have to be open-minded about what life could be, even though we
Yeah.
don't want to.
Well,
I don't
the
think
reason
you have to have some sort of bias, though. I don't think you
Right.
can have no bias when you're
Like,
approaching this question, which makes it really hard to get into science fiction, because it's fiction, right?
Yeah,
right. Well,
like-
like
real.
Joe said, like if using the electromagnetic spectra and radio waves is like a stepping stone, and we're now moving away from it, who's to say that there's another civilization that has a future technology that we have yet to discover that doesn't even use electromagnetic waves, and so we'd never be able to
But who's to say
detect
that
them
there's a
because that's what we're looking
civilization
for.
civilization
Right.
that does use electromagnetic? You're
Exactly. Yeah. And
I don't
that's why we rely on the Drake equation, because
I don't think our
it's
own
science by
method-
probability.
our own bias would be a bad thing, because the
Right.
probability for what kinds of life or what types of civilizations, in terms of where they are in their advanced technology, is so broad ranged, and we don't really know.
Exactly.
I think this is like
Further into a different area or one part of this question, we can't go any further.
Right.
I think this is like trying to prove the Fermat's last theorem like 400 years ago. I think this is one of these things where we can conjecture about something, and we think that somehow we're within reach of answering a question. But I think that science hasn't gone through and built the architecture necessary to answer that question. In the
Right.
same way that Fermat's last theorem did back in the days when it was conjectured, no one had the mathematical architecture needed to solve it and to resolve it had not been developed, and was still hundreds of years from being developed. In the same way that when we're searching for aliens, we might be even further away from being
Right.
able to actually ask these questions and answer them.
And then
I
that's
don't
where the
think we
great
answer the
filter comes
question.
back in too, because
I don't
then
think
who's
Sorry,
to
go
say
ahead.
who's to say given outside circumstances that the civilization would even have enough time to set up that architecture in the first place.
I
you
just
know.
don't think we get into that question until. I don't think the idea of life outside or aliens gets into the question of, is it worth our time, spend resources into looking into this, until we have progressed in other areas of the science, I think, and technology, where that question is even
Right.
viable. Or
I
that
also think
Exactly.
I also
because the
think it's
development of things is still going on.
Right.
But I
Like,
think
we
it's
don't even
worth
have
funding
concept
and
yet.
worth searching. I mean, I think, are we
I think it
alone
is
is the
worth
most fundamental
searching.
question to who we are as humans.
Yeah.
I do think, but I think it's going to take. I don't think it's going to be
It's not going to
a
be
few
so.
generations.
Yeah.
It's going to be for a long time before we even approach. Can we search for life here? Because there are other areas where I feel the need is more great to actually develop. and look
Right,
at.
like
Maybe
getting
that's what's
quantum
needed
computers
for us
out
to, maybe,
might be the stepping stone to discovering all of it, you know?
or like even getting to Mars in terms of the
Right.
idea of space traveling would open up the possibilities
Like-
of what can we even look at from this standpoint now.
Like,
Oh.
is space travel like that even possible in the first place? And that's
So
what
we
we'd
send
have to
out
find out, you
things
know?
to different habitable planets, or just search different planets out there first. Maybe it's that first step of, is there a planet that's actually suitable for life first before we get into the question of different life civilizations out there. Because that might narrow down our filter in terms of, okay, well, if this planet is suitable for life and we find like grass, or we find even just water, different things like this, where it's like, okay, so
Right.
there's some life here. Then the question becomes, where is that complex life that we
Yeah.
might be
Mhm.
looking
But
for?
see, you're being biased because you said there's grass.
But I'm
Maybe
saying,
Earth is the only planet with grass with life on it.
maybe you look at different chemical compounds for what makes up life, but
Right.
I think you can't be not biased. You
Right.
can't help but be biased in this
Well,
search.
we're the only life that we know of.
Yeah,
Look
our
at every
scope of-
single space movie, bro. Like, most of the aliens in the early days were based off of
Exactly,
humans. They're
and
humanoid.
maybe there's some different variation where there's a couple of things here or there in terms of chemistry where it's different, where we could open up our scope as to there might be this possibility of life out here. But I think
Right.
until we find
Until we know it's possible,
exactly,
we're stuck to a certain area.
we have to have a certain basis of
Right.
life. That
Like,
stems from
we
us.
know life like us can exist, so it's easy to look for other areas like us. But then it also takes a lot of other scientific
I don't think
development
you
to
can start off with the fiction. You have to start grounded in some reality before you move into the
right. Because what if that fiction isn't possible?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a two-way track.
there are two kind of big things that we can use at least to narrow the scope and to at least in some way make this search more fruitful and this exercise more fruitful, in that we know that there are some immutable laws of the universe, and we know, for example, that energy is just necessary. I mean, life must be using
Right.
energy.
using up energy.
We have to. Yeah.
There's no way.
It's the laws of
So-
conservation. Yeah.
For example, we can look at the different ways that we know of using and dissipating energy. I think that, for example, is a fruitful exercise. We also know that, what we've discovered on Earth was the order in which we discovered the laws of the universe were no accident. I'm somewhat convinced that aliens elsewhere, regardless of their structure and their chemistry and all of this, would be confronted with presumably most of the same challenges, at least, which initially would lead them towards developing a similar sort of
like surely they have night and day, presumably they have gravity, they have presumably seasons.
The timeline has to be similar in terms of how things come together as well.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I
so
think
it'd be easy to look for that like early type stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, for example, it seems that Earth I think an interesting point is that Earth is at the very center, is as close as can be to the sun, to being within the Goldilocks zone. And so, for example, Earth is one of the driest water planets that we know of. Most planets that have water have a lot more than Earth. And so, for example, Earth was suitable to developing life on land, but what if life on I think this is an easy way to look at sort of different options. On other planets, it's possible that life developed underwater. And so what kinds of signals would they be emitting, and how would they be contacting us? Presumably, and then again, electromagnetic signature becomes harder to detect because it doesn't travel so well through water for the most part.
Like who's to say like life didn't develop underground? Then how would they have different experiences to life on the surface, and how would that?
I think regardless of that, though, the fundamental building blocks are still there.
Yeah.
Regardless of where they end up or how they end up, how they end up living. in their environments, the way they still come together, I feel, still has to be grounded in some sort of baseline that is similar to us. It can't not be. At least for what we know and what we would look for, it can't not be that.
Well,
We
and
don't know
they
anything.
would have overcome the same technological challenges as us.
Perhaps, yeah.
Even if they
Yeah.
are, even if gravity is just, even if gravity is pliable to their will, they still have found a way to conquer gravity.
They might name it something else.
They might name it
Right.
something
Yeah,
else,
yeah,
they
yeah.
might
Name
have
it
a
something
different way
else.
of feeling it and all that, but they still have it. I think and I mean, which in some sense but I mean, all of this just informs us that stuff exists. It doesn't really help us find it or look for it in any meaningful way, because even if we can constrain the search parameters by an order of magnitude, that still leaves us an enormous number of places to be checking on, and that still leaves us with enormous distances that are I mean, for example, we have sent messages through space to a couple different locations, all of which are hundreds, or if not thousands, or hundreds of thousands of light years away. So the likelihood of us getting a return on that, or the likelihood of us
very
knowing
small.
that other people have gotten that signal, are just
Near impossible.
zero. But I mean, irrespective of the likelihood, or irrespective of how fruitful the search is, there are still questions that we can be asking ourselves about what obvious technological things could be detectable to us. For example, energy is, as we already talked about, is a big one. So you would assume that as civilizations get more and more developed, they would be increasing their energy production. And they would do this presumably by, in some way, acting on their natural environment. And so one could think, obviously, of the people would use fusion, but then, you know, some structures like Dyson spheres and things like that become invisible. And especially for civilizations that are a little bit more advanced than ours, but not by that much, not by so many orders of magnitude, these could become obvious sort of signatures that could help us find in our search. We would presumably, for example, be able to detect the Dyson spheres, or I mean, this is probably one of the most obvious things that we can find. And yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that we can be looking for like that.
Right. Like what's that one star that scientists have found that has like super irregular like luminosity patterns that people think of Dyson spheres around it?
Oh, I believe
I forget what it's called.
Yeah, Tabby star.
Yeah. Because scientists have like found, pulsars and like constant and sometimes irregular but periodic like variations in stars, but this one's completely different. So people think there's either a Dyson sphere construction or just a partial Dyson sphere around the star that gives the irregular patterns.
Yeah, that's likely, I think, to be more of like a natural astrophysical explanation for it that we just haven't figured out yet. Maybe it is a Dyson sphere, but we like.
I think it's interesting how in the search for life, or in the search for different things of life, we have found different astrophysical phenomena that has increased our knowledge of space as place. Pulsars and things like this. I think it's likely that as we continue to search and expand our search for life, we'll find out different things that'll come up later that we'll be able to explore deeper into, that might answer other questions that don't answer the question of life, but answer that go into different areas. Where there be a different object in space that we just don't know about yet. That I think that does bring up a good point with this exploration. It does explain a lot of. It does show a lot, I think.
Right.
So, like, for example, a classic example of that would be, I forget what astronomer it was in the 1930s, but when you're looking at Mars, he was convinced that there's like aliens on Mars and that they had these canal systems. But like we ended up learning that there's actually these like structures built into the surface of Mars, and that it was an alien associated.
Right. That was from like the old glaciers, right?
I'm not exactly sure.
And I mean, even as close as 200 years ago, we had no way of ruling out the existence of Selenians. Selenians are people who live on the moon.
Those were the
like
mold.
Martians live on Mars. Selenians live on the moon. even 200 years ago, we had no good. We had no idea whether they existed or not, and many reasonable people thought that they did, and now we know
Right.
it's ridiculous. But I mean, it does give you a greater appreciation for the scale of the universe that we live in, and
as well as how far we've progressed as a people.
yeah,
I
Right.
think it does explain whether across the spectrum of intelligence, doesn't matter where we're at. The point we've got to is actually still pretty phenomenal. I mean,
Right.
in terms of being able to communicate with different languages, and the technological progressions you made, I think it speaks to volumes.
Right. Like from 5,000 years ago, we decided to, stop hunting and gathering and decided to settle down. And then, 3,000 years goes by and then you have modern history. Another 1,800 years goes by, sitting in the 1900s. And then here we are today with, virtual worlds and
yeah. Well,
cutting
we are
edge
kind of
technology.
making our way through some orders of magnitude of the universe in terms like information and energy. But our ability to both probe larger orders of magnitude and smaller. But we are still, especially on the bigger end, every time we climb an order of magnitude, which is no small feat. Every single time we do it, we open Pandora's box and we realize that there's just still so much more out there.
And honestly, we might not even get to all those questions in our life.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
I think that's something we have to be okay with.
yeah, I mean, this was one of the Freeman Dyson's big skepticisms, and he was always skeptical about these grand unified theories and bringing together all sorts of different fields of human activity into one central explanation about how the universe works. Because in some sense, maybe the universe is irreconcilable. Maybe, for example, we will never find a coherent way to join quantum mechanics and general relativity. Maybe this is just, maybe we will never be able to answer some of the most fundamental questions that we can ask ourselves. And this is probably just part of what defines the human experience.
Science, the search for the unknown.
I do think in the future, when we decide to put more research into finding aliens, I wouldn't be surprised to see if that search is structured with some form of philosophical backbone. I do think
Right.
when we to tackle this question, we do have to look at it with a philosophical lens as well to study, what patterns we might have to look for in terms of civilizations. Because I do think with life there is going to be a general structure to get to a civilization, and how to build up a civilization.
Right.
And those questions do have to be asked. I think they're going to be answered with the help of the philosophical. I think that will also help narrow
Like
down.
if we understand like ourselves better, then we can apply it. Like even if the chemical makeup of the life is different, if civilizations become intelligent, there has to be at least some common stepping stones that every civilization
in
has to
terms of,
hit.
How people grouped, whether they spread out, how they form their
Right.
structure with their people. You have to consider they probably communicate some sort of way. So
Mhm.
they have to have some sort of language. There are things with life that do come along. I do believe that we all have to study and
Like
look
commonalities between all life.
exactly. Yeah, that we
Yeah.
can look for as more of a basis to narrow down our search, or
Mhm. Yeah, because maybe language isn't very easy to detect across galaxies, but maybe it's something we find is.